The sheriff's cruiser sat at the curb like it belonged there. Susan stood on the front step in the same faded blue robe she always wore on Sunday mornings, except now her hands were shaking so hard the sleeves fluttered. Kara was behind her, half hidden, peeking over Susan's shoulder like a kid caught stealing cookies, except she was 32 and she'd just ruined my life. Across the street, old Mrs. Gladys Meyer had her curtain pulled back 2 inches. She wasn't alone. 2 more neighbors hovered at their windows. In a street like ours, people didn't miss a garbage can tipping over, let alone a sheriff walking up to a house in broad daylight with a folder under his arm. The sheriff didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Ma'am," he said, calm as a man reading a weather report, "this property is legally owned by Mark Ellison. You need to vacate the premises." Susan's mouth opened. No sound came out, like the air had been knocked clean out of her. Kara made a small choking noise, half sob, half protest. "That's not," she started, but she couldn't finish. Her mascara was already smudging. She looked toward me like she expected me to blink and make it all go away the way I'd always done when she was younger and she broke something or lied about something, like I'd always done for 17 years. I stood on the sidewalk, my hands in the pockets of my work jacket, feeling every set of eyes on me. I could smell cold air and leaf mold and the faint, sweet odor of somebody's dryer sheets drifting down the block. The porch light was off, but I could still picture it, the bulb I replaced last month on a ladder that wobbled, Susan holding it steady with one hand and a cup of coffee with the other, saying, "Careful, Mark," like she still cared. The sheriff turned a page. "This order is effective immediately," he said. "If you refuse, you may be removed." Susan's eyes finally found mine. I expected anger. I expected her to spit one more ugly line, the kind you can't ever take back. Instead, she looked lost, like she'd walked into a room she'd lived in for years and suddenly couldn't recognize where the light switch was. And I felt it, that old familiar pull, the urge to soften, the urge to make it easier for her. Then I remembered her voice just 3 weeks earlier, sharp as broken glass. "Get out. You don't belong here anymore." So I didn't move. I didn't rescue anyone. I just breathed slow and steady the way Diane Keller told me to, and when the sheriff paused, I said it plain. "I didn't come to argue," I told them. "I came to take my life back." There was a silence so thick it felt like snow. And that silence right there on my front lawn with the whole street watching was the first time I realized I might survive what they did to me. Because 3 hours after Susan threw me out in a storm over a lie Kara invented, the police called my name. And that was only the beginning. The night it happened didn't start like a night that was going to change everything. It started like any other Tuesday in Dayton, Ohio. Gray sky, wet streets, my boots tracking in damp leaves. I didn't feel like sweeping off the porch again. I'd worked a 12-hour shift at the hospital, not the glamorous part of a hospital either. I was the guy who kept the lights on the air, moving the boilers, behaving the doors locking. Facilities management, the kind of job you only notice when it stops working. My hands smelled faintly of machine oil and disinfectant. That hospital has a smell you can't scrub out of your skin, bleach, old coffee, and something metallic that sits in the back of your throat. I washed up at the sink, rolled my sleeves down, and went home. Susan had made chicken casserole, the easy kind with canned cream soup and those crunchy onions on top. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm. It was familiar. We ate at the table that had a little wobble in the back left leg, the one I kept meaning to fix. The TV was on low in the living room, local news, a car dealership ad, then some weather guy warning about the storm rolling in from the west. Kara showed up late like she always did, letting the screen door slap behind her. She didn't knock. She never knocked. She'd lived with us off and on since her 20s, drifting in when she needed to get back on her feet, drifting out when she met someone new or got tired of rules. She was wearing leggings and a sweatshirt with a college logo she never attended. Her hair was pulled up in a messy bun. She smelled like fruity vape and cheap vanilla perfume. "Hey," Susan said, forcing cheer into her voice. "We saved you some." Kara slid into the chair, eyes already on her phone. "Thanks," she mumbled. I didn't say much. After 17 years with Susan, I'd learned there were 2 kinds of nights. Nights you talked and nights you kept your head down. Kara had a mood to her, a tightness like a rubber band wound too far. Susan asked her how work was going. Kara sighed dramatically like a teenager. "Fine," she said, "whatever." That's Kara's favorite word, whatever. It means don't ask me questions, don't expect anything from me, don't make me feel like I owe you. I took my plate to the sink and started rinsing it. The casserole dish sat on the counter still steaming a little. The rain had started tapping at the window above the sink, soft at first, then steadier. Susan wiped the table. Kara scrolled. The TV droned on about a new donut place opening near the highway. And then out of nowhere, Kara's phone made a little ding sound. She froze. Her thumb stopped moving. I watched her face change in a way that made the hair on my arms lift. Her eyes widened and her lips parted as if she'd seen a ghost. Then she looked up at Susan. "Mom," she said, and her voice went thin, almost trembling. "Can I talk to you, like, right now?" Susan glanced at me, then back at Kara. "Sure, what is it?" Kara stood up, phone clutched in her hand like evidence. She didn't go to her room. She didn't ask for privacy. She walked right into the kitchen where I stood at the sink, water running. Susan followed her, and Kara pointed at me. "It's him," she said. I blinked. "What?" Kara held the phone out towards Susan, but she angled it so I couldn't see. I knew something was off. I knew it. And now I have proof. Susan's eyebrows pinched together. "Kara, what are you talking about?" Kara swallowed, then took a shaky breath, like she was about to confess something brave. "He's been messing with my stuff," she said. "My accounts, my money." My stomach dropped so fast it felt like I'd missed a step on the stairs. "What are you saying?" Kara's eyes flicked to me. There was something in them, cold calculation buried under fake fear. "I'm saying," she continued, "I checked my email, and there are logins from this house. From here. I didn't do it. And I found messages." Susan's face went pale. "Messages?" Kara nodded fast, threatening messages. Like he's watching me, like he's unstable. That word hit me like a slap. Unstable. The kind of word that turns you into a problem instead of a person. I turned off the water and faced them fully. "Susan, that's not true. I haven't touched Kara's accounts. I don't even know her passwords." Kara let out a little laugh that wasn't funny. "Of course you'd say that." Susan's eyes darted between us. "Mark? Why would Kara make that up?" My mouth opened and nothing came out at first, because I had a lot of answers and none of them would sound good. Because Kara made things up all the time. She made up excuses. She made up stories. She made up a version of herself where she was always the victim and everyone else was the villain. But I'd never seen her go for my throat like this. "I don't know," I said, and my voice sounded tired. "But it's not true." Kara's chin quivered just enough to look convincing. "Mom, I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared for you." Susan stiffened like those words plugged into something primal inside her. Protect the child. Believe the crying daughter. Even if the daughter was grown and the tears were a performance. I tried to keep my tone even. "Susan, listen to me. You know me. You've lived with me for 17 years. Susan's eyes flashed. "Then why does Kara feel scared?" "Because she's manipulating you," I blurted before I could stop myself. Kara gasped like I'd punched her. See how he talks? That's what I mean." Susan took a step toward me, and I saw something in her face I'd never seen directed at me before. Not just anger, not just hurt. It was disgust. "You don't get to call my daughter a liar," she snapped. I felt heat rise up my neck. My heart thumped hard in my chest. Outside, the rain picked up, rattling against the window. Wind shoved the branches of the maple tree by the driveway. "Susan," I said, "low, Kara is lying. I'm telling you straight, she's lying." Susan's hands curled into fists. "Stop." Kara's voice got softer, sweeter. "Mom, I don't want to make a big deal. I need to feel safe." Safe. Another loaded word. Another word that could turn me into a threat with one breath. Susan stared at me a long second. Then her shoulders rose as she took in air. And she let it out as a scream. "Get out." The sound bounced off the cabinets, off the refrigerator, off the tile floor I'd mopped last weekend. It didn't sound like my wife. It sounded like a stranger living in her body. "Get out of my house," she shouted. "You don't belong here anymore." I stood there, water still dripping from my hands, watching Kara's mouth tighten at the corners, just for a second, like she was trying not to smile. My first instinct was to argue, to defend myself, to list every bill I paid, every broken thing I fixed, every night I sat up with Susan when she cried about money, every time I bailed Kara out of some mess without making Susan feel guilty. But I looked at Susan's face and realized I was already convicted. So I did the only thing I could do with any dignity left. I took my work jacket off the hook by the back door, the one that still smelled like oil and winter air, and I put it on. I grabbed my wallet and my phone off the counter. My keys were in the little bowl by the door next to Susan's. Susan stood with her arms crossed, breathing hard, eyes wide, like she'd just set something on fire and wasn't sure if it would burn the whole house down. Kara stood behind her, clutching her phone like it was a weapon. I opened the door. Cold wind slapped me in the face. Rain sprayed in sideways. The porch light was off. The yard looked dark and unfamiliar. I stepped out anyway, and I didn't look back. The police didn't show up with lights and sirens. No drama, no neighbors gawking, just a calm voice on the other end of the phone, steady and professional, like he was calling to remind me my car warranty had expired. Mr. Ellison, this is Officer Tom Reynolds with the Dayton Police Department. We just need to ask you a few questions. I was sitting in my car behind the Meijer on Wilmington Pike, the engine off the windows, fog from my breath. It was 1:07 in the morning. The rain had slowed to a cold drizzle, the kind that seeps into your bones instead of soaking your clothes. Am I being arrested? I asked. There was a pause, not a long one, just enough. No, sir, he said. We received a complaint. We're doing a welfare check. Welfare. Another one of those words that sounds harmless until it's pointed at you. I leaned my head back against the cracked vinyl seat and stared at the ceiling. Ask your questions. Officer Reynolds was polite, too polite for a man who thought he was talking to a criminal. He asked where I was. I told him. He asked if I'd left the house voluntarily. I said yes. He asked if I'd threatened my stepdaughter in any way. No, I said, never. Another pause. I could hear paper shuffling, maybe a pen scratching. Somewhere behind him, a door closed. Sir, he said, do you and your wife own the house together? The question landed wrong, like a note out of tune. What? The house on Briarwood Drive, he clarified. Is your name on the deed? I swallowed. Yes, mine is. Only yours. I thought of Susan at the kitchen table years ago, shoulders slumped, a stack of bills between us. I remembered her voice, tired and embarrassed. I don't want my name on anything anymore, Mark. I messed things up once. I don't want to mess up your credit too. Yes, I said slowly, only mine. There was another pause, longer this time. Thank you, sir, Officer Reynolds said. That's all for now. We'll note that you cooperated. And the complaint, I asked. It's vague, he admitted. No evidence of immediate danger. If there's anything else, we'll follow up. The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a long time after that, the screen glowing weakly in the dark car. Vague. That was it. One lie. One shaky story. Enough to throw me out of my own house, but not enough to hold up under even the lightest pressure. I laughed once, a short, dry sound that surprised me. Then the cold crept back in. I drove to my brother Ron's place on the west side, the Impala, humming low windshield wipers, squeaking like they always did when it rained. Ron's porch light was on when I pulled up, like he'd been waiting. He didn't ask why I was there. He just opened the door, stepped aside, and said, boots off. Coffee's on. That's Ron, 60 years old, retired union electrician, hands like tree roots, and a face that's seen enough to know when not to ask. I slept on his couch with my jacket folded under my head. The cushions smelled like sawdust and old cologne. I woke up before dawn with my heart racing, the words, "You don't belong here anymore," still echoing in my head. Ron slid a mug across the table when I came into the kitchen. Gas station coffee, strong and bitter. I wrapped my hands around it and stared into the steam. She really kick you out, he asked. I nodded. Over Kara, he guessed. I nodded again. Ron sighed through his nose. That girl's trouble. I didn't argue, I didn't defend her. I was past that. After Ron left to run errands, I pulled out my phone and started digging. 17 years of emails, mortgage statements, refinance paperwork, county records I'd never had a reason to look at before. There it was, a PDF from 2012, warranty deed. My name, only my name. My chest tightened. I checked again and again. No Susan, no joint ownership, just me. My hands started to shake, not from fear, but from something else. A slow creeping realization that the ground under this whole mess wasn't as solid as Susan and Kara thought it was. I thought about Kara's face when she accused me, about the way she'd said unstable like she'd practiced it, about how fast Susan had turned on me like 17 years could be erased with one word. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired and sad and angry in a quiet, dangerous way. But for the first time since Susan screamed at me to get out, I felt something else too. Leverage. I picked up my phone and searched for a local attorney. Nothing flashy, no billboards, just a name that kept popping up in reviews. Diane Keller. I stared at her number for a long moment before dialing. Diane Keller's office sat above a barber shop on a quiet side street downtown, the kind of place you'd drive past 100 times without noticing. No flashy sign, just her name in plain black letters on frosted glass and a narrow stairway that smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. She was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, hair pulled back, tight reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her handshake was firm but not performative. She didn't waste time with sympathy, and I appreciated that. Start from the beginning, she said, clicking a pen. And don't skip the boring parts. The boring parts are usually where the truth lives. So I told her everything. The casserole, the rain, Kara's voice turning soft and scared like a switch had flipped. Susan's scream, the police call. I told her about the refinance, about Susan's bankruptcy, about the deed with only my name on it. Diane listened without interrupting, nodding now and then, her pen scratching notes. When I finished, she leaned back and exhaled slowly. Okay, she said. First things first. You did the right thing by leaving. I frowned. I lost my house. She shook her head. No, you lost access to it. Big difference. She slid the deed copy across the desk toward me. This house is legally yours. Sole ownership. That gives you options. But if you rush in angry, you'll blow half of them. I stared at the paper. My name looked strange there, like it belonged to someone else. So what do I do? Diane met my eyes. You don't confront, you don't explain, you don't text, you don't post, you document, and you wait. Waiting had never been my strength. I'd spent my whole life fixing things when they broke. Leaky pipes, jammed doors, broken marriages. But this wasn't something I could fix with a wrench and a long night. Over the next week, I learned a new kind of patience. I stayed at Ron's place, sleeping on the couch, showering at odd hours so I wouldn't get in his way. Every morning, I drove past my own house on Briarwood Drive on my way to work. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. But I looked. Susan's car was still there. Kara's too. Lights on late. Music, sometimes bass thumping through the walls I'd insulated myself years ago. Once I saw Kara on the porch laughing into her phone's cigarette smoke, curling around her head like she didn't have a care in the world. At work, I messed up a maintenance schedule and caught hell from my supervisor. I forgot my lunch in the break room fridge and didn't notice until the end of my shift. I felt off, like a man walking around without his skin. At night, I replayed the scene in my head. Kara's accusation, Susan's face. I kept thinking I'd missed something, some earlier warning sign I'd ignored. Then Diane called. Mark, she said, I ran a credit check with your permission. There's something you need to see. We met again that afternoon. She turned her monitor toward me and scrolled. Kara had been busy, store credit cards, a phone account, a small personal loan, all tied to my address, some overdue, some maxed out. I didn't open these. I said, my jaw tight. I know, Diane replied, but here's the thing. These don't just explain her lie, they explain her timing. My stomach sank. Explain. If you moved back in, she said, or if you started asking questions, she risked exposure. So she reframed you as the threat. I thought of the way Kara had looked at me across the kitchen, the fear that had seemed staged. She didn't want me gone, I said quietly. She needed me gone. Diane nodded. Exactly. The realization didn't bring relief. It brought a different kind of hurt, one that settled deep like damp in your bones. Susan still hadn't called. Not once. No apology, no questions, just silence. Then late one night, my phone buzzed. Susan. The message was short. We need to talk. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I set the phone face down and went to bed. The next day, Diane walked me through the next steps, filing for exclusive occupancy, preparing notice, documenting every interaction, screenshots of Kara's social media posts about toxic men and protecting family. Copies of the lock change receipt Susan had emailed to herself without realizing I still had access to the shared account. Do not respond, Diane reminded me. Silence is not weakness, it's strategy. One afternoon while I was at Ron's kitchen table sorting papers, Susan called again. This time I answered. Mark, she said, and her voice sounded normal. Too normal. We need money. I closed my eyes. For what, I asked. Things are tight, she said. You know how it is. Kara's been under a lot of stress. I almost laughed. Almost. I'll have my lawyer contact you, I said. There was a sharp intake of breath. Your lawyer? Yes. She hung up without another word. That night I sat alone in my car outside Ron's place, the engine idling, the radio low. An old country song came on, one Susan used to hum while folding laundry. I turned it off. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel like a man waiting to be rescued. I felt like a man standing on the edge of something irreversible. My phone buzzed again, a text from Diane. Do you still have your spare keys in the garage code? Yes, I typed back. There was a pause. Good, she replied. Don't use them. Not yet. I leaned back in the seat, staring up at the dark Ohio sky, and understood what she meant. This wasn't about getting back in. It was about letting the truth walk in on its own. Susan didn't call again for a while. Neither did Kara. That silence felt strange at first, like the quiet after a storm, when you're waiting to see what's been knocked loose. Then I realized something else was happening. They thought they'd won. I started seeing it in small ways. Kara's social media post popped up in my peripheral vision screenshots Ron sent me with a raised eyebrow emoji. Quotes about cutting toxic people out. A selfie on my front porch, her head tilted just right, so the house looked like a prize behind her. A picture of her holding a mug I recognized instantly. Blue ceramic. A hairline crack near the handle. I bought that mug in Nashville in 2010. Susan and I had gone down for a weekend, stayed in a cheap hotel near the river. She said it reminded her of my hands, solid, dependable. Seeing Kara wrap her fingers around it made my jaw clench. At work, I kept my head down. The hospital didn't care that my marriage had blown up. Air handlers still needed filters. Doors still stuck. I missed a valve on a routine check one afternoon and caught myself just before it turned into a bigger problem. My supervisor glanced at me and said, "You okay, Mark?" Hey. Yeah, I said, just tired. That was true. I was bone tired. The kind that sleep doesn't touch. One evening, Ron slid a plate of meatloaf across the table and said, "You're grinding your teeth." I hadn't noticed. I forced myself to unclench my jaw. I keep thinking if I'd said something different. Ron shook his head. You could have read her the Bible and she'd still have believed her kid. He wasn't wrong. The lock change receipt came through our old shared email account late one night. Susan must have forgotten I still had access. There it was in black and white, date, time, company name. I forwarded it to Diane without comment. A week later, Susan called again. I let it ring twice before answering. Mark, she said, no apology, no warmth. We need to straighten some things out. Her tone was businesslike, like we were co-workers who'd had a disagreement over scheduling. I've asked my lawyer to handle communications, I said. She scoffed. A lawyer over this? This, I repeated calmly, is exactly why. There was a pause. I could hear Kara in the background, her voice low but sharp. Susan turned away from the phone, muttering something I couldn't make out. Then Susan came back on the line. Kara's under a lot of stress. Bills, car trouble. You know how things add up. I looked out the windshield at Ron's driveway, cracked concrete I'd helped patch years ago. I'm sure they do. So Susan continued, we thought maybe you could help out, just until things settle. There it was, not guilt, not regret, an invoice. I won't be sending money, I said. Susan inhaled sharply. After everything we've been through. Yes, I said, after everything. She hung up. That night, Diane emailed me a draft notice. Formal language. Dry. Precise. It felt strange seeing my life reduced to paragraphs and bullet points, but there was comfort in it too. Paper doesn't lie. Paper doesn't shout. We filed for exclusive occupancy and scheduled service through the sheriff's office. Diane warned me it wouldn't be immediate. There were steps, notices, timelines. Let them keep thinking they're safe, she said. People make mistakes when they think no one's watching. Kara made plenty. She started having friends over. Cars parked half up on the lawn, music louder, trash bags piled near the garage. A neighbor texted Ron, assuming the message would get to me somehow. Everything okay over there? The text read. I didn't reply. I documented. One afternoon, Kara posted a long rant about men who think money equals control. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. The comments rolled in sympathy, encouragement, hearts, and angry faces. Diane saved every screenshot. I tried not to watch too closely. It wasn't good for me. But sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in my car with the engine off and look at the house from down the block. Lights on, shadows moving, my house occupied by people who thought I was gone for good. The urge to confront rose up in me like acid. To march up, pound on the door, demand my life back. Every time it did, I remembered Diane's voice. Silence is strategy. Then came the call I wasn't expecting. Susan again. This time she sounded different, edgier. We need to talk, she said, in person. No, I replied. Mark, she snapped, irritation bleeding through. This is getting ridiculous. What's ridiculous, I said evenly, is that you threw me out over a lie and haven't apologized once? Silence. Kara says Susan started. I cut her off. Have your lawyer talk to mine. There was a sharp breath, then the click of the line going dead. I sat there afterward, phone in my hand, heart pounding. Saying no didn't feel good. It felt necessary. The next morning, a message from Diane lit up my screen. We're set at red tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. Be there. Say nothing unless asked. I stared at the time for a long moment. Tomorrow. I went to work and fixed what needed fixing. I came home to Ron's and folded my jacket, smoothing out the creases. I slept in short stretches, waking to the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of 17 years pressing down on my chest. At 10:45 the next morning, I drove toward Briarwood Drive. The sky was a pale Ohio blue, cold and clear. The street looked the same as it always had. Except this time, I wasn't the one being watched. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up right on time. 11:29 a.m. I was already there, parked a few houses down, engine off, hands resting on my thighs to keep them from shaking. I'd worn my work jacket, the one with my name stitched on the chest in faded blue thread, not to make a statement, just because it was mine. The cruiser stopped in front of the house like it had done it 100 times before. No lights, no siren, just tires on pavement and a door opening with a solid final thud. Susan opened the front door before the sheriff even reached the steps. She must have been watching through the blinds. She wore jeans and a sweater this time, hair pulled back too tight. She looked smaller than I remembered, tired. Kara appeared behind her barefoot arms, folded face already set in that familiar mix of defiance and wounded innocence. Across the street, curtains moved. Mrs. Gladys Meyer stood at her living room window, hands on her hips. She'd lived on that block longer than anyone. If something happened on Briarwood Drive, Gladys knew. The sheriff spoke first, calm, measured. Ma'am, he said, I'm here to serve notice. Susan blinked. Notice of what? He opened the folder. This property is legally owned by Mark Ellison, he read. Sole ownership. You and any other occupants are required to vacate the premises in accordance with this order. Kara laughed, a short, sharp sound. That's not possible. The sheriff didn't look at her. Miss, this doesn't require your agreement. Susan's face drained of color. There must be a mistake, she said. My husband. The sheriff lifted his eyes. Your name is not on the deed. Silence fell hard. I saw it ripple down the block. A neighbor stepped out onto her porch. Another pretended to check the mail. Mrs. Gladys leaned closer to the glass. Kara's confidence cracked. No, she said. Mom, tell him he's wrong. Susan's mouth opened, closed. She looked at the sheriff. Then finally she looked at me. I stepped forward, then slow and deliberate. Every footstep felt heavy, like I was walking through mud. I didn't come to argue, I said. I came to take my life back. The words landed and stayed there. Kara's eyes filled with tears instantly. She turned to the sheriff, voice trembling. Officer, I don't feel safe. He's always been unstable. There it was again, that word. The sheriff glanced at her, then back at his paperwork. That allegation is noted, he said, neutral. It doesn't change the order. Kara's shoulders shook. She cried louder now, the kind of cry meant to draw attention, to pull sympathy out of thin air. No one moved to comfort her. Susan swayed slightly, like she might sit down on the porch steps. Mark, she whispered, we can talk about this. I shook my head once. We had 17 years to talk. The sheriff cleared his throat. You'll be given time to gather personal belongings. Any resistance will be documented. Mrs. Gladys opened her front door and leaned out. Well, she said loudly, I always wondered how Kara afforded all that new stuff. Kara snapped her head toward the sound rage flashing through her tears. The sheriff turned another page. There are also pending inquiries related to financial activity connected to this address, he said. You may be contacted regarding that separately. Kara went very still. Susan looked between us, understanding dawning too late. She pressed a hand to her mouth. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty, clean, like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. As the sheriff stepped back toward his cruiser, I looked at the house one last time. The porch, the door, the windows I'd replaced myself after a storm years ago. It wasn't victory. It was closure. I didn't go inside after they left. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute longer, hands still in my jacket pockets, listening to the quiet settle back over Briarwood Drive. The neighbors drifted away one by one. Curtains closed. A mailbox clanged shut. Life moved on the way it always does, even after something breaks. Susan didn't say another word. She just watched me from the porch as the sheriff drove off, her face pale and unreadable. Kara had already disappeared back into the house, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. I turned and walked back to my car. That was the last time I stood in front of that house as a married man. The weeks that followed were strangely calm. Too calm at first. I kept waiting for another explosion, for angry calls, threats, accusations, but they never came. Diane handled the paperwork. Everything moved forward the way she said it would. Slowly, legally, without drama. I stayed with Ron a little longer, then found a small one-bedroom apartment closer to the hospital. Nothing fancy. Beige carpet, a view of the parking lot. But the heat worked, the locks were solid, and at night no one yelled my name like it was an accusation. I bought a used recliner from a guy down the road and a cheap coffee maker from Target. The first morning I sat there drinking my coffee, listening to the low hum of traffic outside, I realized something surprising. I could breathe again. 3 months after the sheriff came, Susan sent a text. Kara moved in with her new boyfriend. The apartment is tiny. Things are hard right now. Could we meet and talk? I read it once, then again. 17 years of memories flickered through my mind. Holidays, arguments, quiet mornings, promises made and broken. I felt the old pull, that instinct to fix, to soften, to take responsibility for something that wasn't mine anymore. I deleted the message. No reply, no explanation, just silence. Not out of cruelty, out of self-respect. I don't tell this story because I won. I tell it because I survived. Because I learned that loyalty doesn't mean erasing yourself, and love doesn't mean accepting a lie just to keep the peace. I didn't get revenge by yelling. I didn't humiliate anyone with my hands. I let the truth do the work. I stepped back, stayed quiet, and let the paperwork speak louder than anger ever could. And if you're listening to this and it feels uncomfortably familiar, if you've ever been blamed, discarded, or made to feel invisible after giving someone your best years, know this. Walking away isn't losing. Sometimes it's the strongest thing you can do. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to reflect on it. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more real stories about dignity, truth, and quiet justice, consider subscribing. Thank you for listening.